Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with another section of our Benny's Bats for today, Thursday, August 20th. There's an 11-game slate tonight for MLB, and what we like to do on the Benny's Bats section is we go over every pitcher on the mound, figure out what their weaknesses are, and then figure out which batters on the other team profile to do the best against them. So let's get right into it. First guy we're going to talk about today is Brad Hand. Hand's a left-handed pitcher for the Miami Marlins. Right-handed bats are hitting .307 against him this year with a 1.54 WHIP. There's a couple guys on that Phillies team who have been doing pretty well. The Phillies are a team that basically runs out what we like to call in basketball taxi squads. And what that means is they have guys who platoon against right or left-handed batters, and they have a different lineup depending on the handedness of pitcher that they're facing. A couple guys who stand out on that Phillies team, Andres Blanco has been absolutely on fire lately. He's a middle infield option on most sites that you can use. He has a 477 WOBA and a 282 ISO score lately. He's been batting second for that Phillies team. In 3 straight starts, he's got at least 16 points or more over on DraftKings. So he's definitely somebody that you have to look at, especially because his price is cheap. I think he was a min-priced option on DraftKings yesterday. He's cheap on just about every site, and he's somebody who's been producing, so he's definitely somebody who we got to look at. Another guy who does very well against left-handed pitching is Darren Ruff. Ruff has a 450 WOBA, 200 ISO against left-handers so far this year. He's one of the big right-handed bats that they do have on the Phillies, and he's another guy who's pretty cheap because he is in a platoon split. He pretty much only plays against left-handed pitching, so this could be a good game for him today against a guy like Hand. The other guy who I just wanted to mention is Jeff Francoeur. Francoeur's been batting cleanup for them against left-handed pitching, and he's now homered in back-to-back games. So he's another guy that you can get cheap that has some upside. I don't love the Phillies today, although they have been very good, and I think they're in a good matchup. They are playing in Miami, which is not a great hitter's ballpark, so I don't expect huge upside out of them today. But I do think if you're looking for some cheap salary-saving options, there's a couple guys on this team that you can definitely look at. Another guy who actually hits pretty well on this team against left-handed pitching is Cesar Hernandez. He's definitely cooled off, though. You guys know I'm a big fan of Cesar. I was using him a lot right after the All-Star break. I've kind of shied away from using him lately. He hasn't really been producing. But again, he's another guy whose numbers, has a good WOBA against left-handers. So his numbers are, make him another guy who you can probably put in play. Next guy we're going to talk about is Yohan Flande. He's a left-handed pitcher for the Colorado Rockies. Right-handed bats are hitting .284 against him with 6 homers and 28 innings pitched. Looking at that Washington team, there's a couple guys you can look at. Even though it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup, Bryce Harper has the best numbers on that team against left-handed pitching. 412 WOBA, 235 ISO score. The only problem is with the Coors Field Premium, you're paying an arm and a leg for this guy, and he really needs to pretty much hit 2 home runs in order to pay off his salary on most of the sites. He's up close to $100,000 over on Fantasy Feud. On DraftKings, he's around $6,000. He's up in the high 5s on FanDuel. Fantasy Aces, he's one of the top outfield options. I'm not sure if he's 6,000, but if he's not, he's pretty close, 59, 58, something like that. So, you really, really need a huge game out of him. Not just a good game. You need a huge game out of him in order to pay that off. And also, it leaves you, basically taking some guys at other positions where you're going to have to look for some min-priced options. So it's not easy to build rosters around him, but he is somebody who stands out. Another guy that I do like is Ryan Zimmerman. Zimmerman's got a 365 WOBA with a 271 ISO number. He's actually been kind of cold lately. I think he's like 1 for his last 21 or something like that. So obviously he's not doing great, but he does have a lot of walks along the way. He is somebody who does have upside, and he does hit well against left-handed pitching. He has pretty much his entire career. So he's another guy I think you can look at. If you're looking for some cheap options, guys like Danny Espinosa, Escobar, again, they're not great options, but they're playing in Coors, which is always a boost for any kind of hitters. And they're pretty cheap options in the middle infield that you can put into your rosters depending on what site you're playing on. Again, if Escobar's hitting in that cleanup spot, there's not too many shortstop eligible players that you're going to be able to find that hit in a good RBI run producing spot in the order. So he's somebody who could be in play. Again, if you're playing on a site that jacks up prices because of the Coors Field Premium, probably not guys that I'm going to be using. But if you can find them cheap on whatever site you're playing on, I think some of these guys do make a little bit of sense to put in your roster. Next guy we can talk about is Tyler Duffy. Duffy's actually was very good in his last start. Left-handed bats have been the way to get to him in the minor leagues. He's only pitched about 1 or 2 starts in the major leagues. I think he's got less than 10 innings under his belt. So there's not much that we can really go on there. But like we said, left-handed bats have been the way to get at him. There's a couple left-handed bats in that Baltimore team, and that Baltimore team does have some pop in it. They do have some guys that can do some damage. A guy like Gerardo Parra. Parra's got a 437 WOBA and a 319 ISO since being traded over to Baltimore. He had a WOBA and an ISO number over 360 and 200 before the trade, so he's definitely somebody who we can look at, especially against left-handed pitching. Another guy that especially as a left-handed bat against right-handed pitching. Another guy that we can look at, even though it's a righty-on-righty matchup, Manny Machado has been absolutely amazing this year for the Baltimore Orioles. 388 WOBA on him, 233 ISO number. He's got the power to hit a home run. He can steal a base, and hitting on top of that order, he's going to get maximum number of at-bats that he can. Last guy is Chris Davis, 369 WOBA, 296 ISO number. This game is at Baltimore, so Baltimore is definitely a very good hitter's park, and Davis is one of the better hitters that they have. He does like hitting at home, and again, in a lefty-righty matchup, that's usually what we look for with a guy like Davis. His price has come up because he has been hitting well lately. So again, if you can find him cheap, I definitely think he's a pretty good option. If you have to pay up for him, I think there's some other first base options that you might want to look at today. I don't know if I really want to invest a ton of salary in a guy like this. Next game we can look at, we got Martin Perez pitching for Texas. Perez is a left-handed pitcher, 333 batting average to right-handed batters with a whip of 1.63. So he's really struggled to get out some of these righties. That's not good for him today because Detroit has a lot of big right-handed bats in that lineup. A couple guys that we definitely want to look at, Miguel Cabrera, 444 WOBA, 268 ISO against left-handed pitching. You also have a guy like McCann at catcher position, 436 WOBA, 254 ISO. A guy like Nick Castellanos, who's a cheap third base option for you, 373 WOBA, 129 ISO, had 2 home runs yesterday. He's been hitting very well against left-handed pitching recently. So he's somebody else that you can put in play. You can also look at guys like Ian Kinsler. If they have Rajay Davis or Anthony Ghost leading off, these are all guys who might be in play. I expect a lot of runs in this game. So does Vegas. Excuse me. Whenever the weather gets warm in Texas, you start to see a lot of balls flying out of that ballpark. So if any of those guys in front of Miggy can get on base, guys like Cabrera, J.D. Martinez, Victor Martinez, they have the power to hit some home runs in that ballpark. So I definitely think that stacking up Detroit might not be a horrible option today. Worked out pretty well last night. I think they pounded out like 15 runs in that game in Chicago and helped a lot of people get to the top of the leaderboards yesterday. Next guy we can look at, excuse me one sec. Next guy we can look at is Jerome Williams. Jerome Williams is a pitcher for the Phillies. Pitching in Miami, so he does get a ballpark bump, but he's allowed left-handed bats to hit 310 against him this year and right-handed bats that hit 323 with 16 home runs and 58 innings pitched. Now, there aren't a lot of big right-handed bats in that Marlins team to consider, but there is one left-hander who I'm looking at, and that's Derek Dietrich. He's got a 395 WOBA, 270 ISO score. Depending on what site you're playing on, some places he's second base eligible, some places he's third base eligible, but he has been producing lately, so you definitely got to consider him. He's a cheap option on any site that you're playing on. I know he's one of the salary-saving guys I've been using a lot lately over on Fantasy Feud. Hit me a big home run in their qualifier the other night. They don't have a qualifier running tonight, but I think there's another one coming back tomorrow. I think they're down to about 9 seats left in their qualifier this year. And again, like we said, it's a $500,000 championship, and it's pretty much about the only qualifier that we have left. Just about everybody else has had theirs. Last week was the Fantasy Aces and the DraftKings finals. This week is going to be the FanDuel final. So if you are looking to get in on make a big score this MLB season, Fantasy Feud is basically the one place left that you can do that for. If you haven't signed up for an account yet, you can come over to the RotoCurve page. If you sign up through our link and use the promo code CURVE, you get a 100% deposit bonus. And on top of that, you also get $25 from the Curve community to try out the site. So if you're looking to get into some of these qualifiers, you can do it at a discounted price and even have a chance to get some money back on top of a really nice pay trail that they have. They haven't been filling all these qualifiers, so they've been paying out close to 20% of the people in, based on the numbers at the end of it. So you do have a good chance to make some money back even if you don't hit a home run on top. Next guy we can talk about is Mike Folty-Newitz. Folty-Newitz is probably one of the worst pitchers on the mound today. He's going up for Atlanta at Chicago. I didn't get a chance to look at the wind, but if the wind in Chicago is like it was yesterday, I think we saw 22 or 23 runs pounded out in that Chicago game yesterday. So obviously Folty-Newitz is going to be in a tough spot. Now, he really struggles with left-handed bats. Left-handed bats are hitting .333 against him with 8 home runs in 36 innings pitched and a whip of 1.75. There's a couple big left-handed bats on that Cubs team that are definitely going to be in play. You got to look at a guy like Kyle Schwarber, 460 WOBA, 317 ISO number. I mean, basically at this point, the rookie is one of the top catching options in fantasy, and he's been producing, so you really can't argue with what he's done for you if you have used him. You also have a guy like Anthony Rizzo, 390 WOBA, 261 ISO score, so he's another guy that's going to be in play. And the last guy to look at is Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant started jacking out home runs again, 356 WOBA, 190 ISO number. Again, I mean, it's undeniable the kind of power that this guy has. Even though it's a righty-on-righty matchup, it's not like Folty-Newitz has been really good against right-handed bats. So the lefties are the way to go after him, but I think even some of the righties are in play. If you want to put a guy like Dexter Fowler in there, if you want to stack them up, maybe even use a guy like Chris Coughlin as a cheap option to make everybody fit, you know, that's going to be probably the way that you go about it today. Alfredo Simon is the next guy we're going to talk about. He's got a 307 batting average with a 1.61 whip. Left-handed to left-handed bats. Left-handed bats also have 12 home runs against him in 74 innings pitched. He's been tough on right-handed bats this year, but basically Texas has all lefties in that lineup, so this is really not a good matchup for Simone. Excuse me. Prince Fielder, probably the top option here, 401 WOBA, 151 ISO. Again, he hasn't shown the home run power we're used to out of Fielder, but he has been getting a lot of hits. He's been getting a lot of extra base hits. He's been driving in runs, so he's been able to put up numbers anyway. You got 2 other guys to look at on top of that order. Rougned Odor, 344 WOBA, 188 ISO. Doesn't seem all that great, but he had a horrible start to the season. So since then, he's been pretty much on fire. Has one of the highest WOBAs in the league since the All-Star break. And again, for a second base option, you're not going to find too many guys that can give you that kind of upside. The other guy who I really like is Sin-Soo Choo. He's got like a 20-something game on-base streak going. I'm not sure if he snapped it recently, but he did, earlier in the week. 375 WOBA, 215 ISO number. And again, he's another guy like Odor. Had a really tough start to the season, was really struggling. So the fact that his numbers are where they are right now is a testament to how good he's been lately. His price has not come up too much. He's still a pretty decent value option on a lot of sites. He's not one of the top priced options. He's pretty much right in the mid-range, but the production that he's been giving you has been kind of elite lately. So I think he's another guy that you can look at today. Next guy we'll talk about, Josh Tomlin, pitching for the Cleveland Indians in Yankee Stadium, making only his second start of 2015. In 2014, right-handed bats hit 314 against him with a 1.53 whip. And left-handed bats had a lower average, but they hit him they hit him harder. They hit him for more power, more home runs. So I think you can look at guys from both sides of the plate against him today. Teixeira is probably still out for the Yankees, but his replacement, Greg Bird, left-handed first baseman rookie for the Yankees, he's been a very cheap salary-saving option that's had some upside. He homered yesterday, got his first home run of the of his career, had a couple hits the other day. I mean, this guy's got a good stick on him. As a left-handed bat going up against a right-handed pitcher in Yankee Stadium, as a cheap option, he's definitely going to be one of the popular salary-saving plays. I like it better on sites where you can put a utility guy in there, or a flex position, as some sites call it. I don't like when I have to use my first base option on him, because first base is usually a power hitting position where you want to go and pay up for some big bats. But again, the way this guy's been hitting, if you can get a big power bat like him for $2,000, it's going to open it up so you can get some other big bats in your lineup. You also want to look at a guy like Carlos Beltran, who's been on fire. 3 home runs in his last 5 games. He's got his WOBA up close to 360 right now. ISO number of 215. So he's somebody else that can jack him out of there when he's hot. And right now he's hot. So he's another guy that's in play. Brett Gardner, 351 WOBA, 154 ISO. McCann, 344 WOBA, 238 ISO. He's another one who's been hitting some home runs. McCann is a boomer bust option, so I really only like him in tournaments. But again, lately he's been doing well, and with Tex out of that lineup, he's moved up into even more of a power hitting role. At home in Yankee Stadium, batting left-handed, all the things that you like to see out of McCann today. Next guy and last guy we can talk about is A-Rod. It's a righty-on-righty split, but again, Tomlin struggled last year in righty-on-righty splits, so I think A-Rod could be in play as well. He's got a 343 WOBA, 199 ISO, so none of these guys are really jumping off the page at you, but there's a couple options that you can definitely consider. It depends how you feel about Tomlin. He had a really good first start. If you think that that's more of who he is, then maybe you want to stay away from these Yankees bats. If you look at his numbers from last year, though, and you think that that's more of the kind of guy that he is, then obviously there's going to be some decisions that you're going to have to make there. Let's see. Next guy we can talk about, Danny Duffy, left-handed pitcher going up against Boston. Boston has not been good this season against left-handed pitching, but they are getting better with some of the bats that they brought up. Xander Bogaerts has been the staple this year against left-handers. 413 WOBA, 127 ISO, shortstop position. Again, he's been batting third in that order. He's been producing. He's more of a cash game play for me. He doesn't have a lot of upside. He doesn't have a lot of home run power, but he is somebody who's been racking up the hits, scoring a couple runs, and even knocking in a few RBIs. As I said, they've gotten better since they've changed their personnel around a little bit. Guys like Jackie Bradley Jr. and Rusney Castillo have been hitting left-handed pitching really well. Neither one of those guys was in a lineup or playing basically at all earlier in the season. Both of them had spent some time in the minor leagues. Now that they're up with the big club and they're both starting and playing on a consistent basis, they make them a little bit better against left-handed pitching. So while the numbers that you might look at for the season don't look all that great for Boston against lefties, they have been hitting lefties a little bit better. So I think you can look at them. Again, as I always say, Fenway Park is a park that does yield a lot of runs, even though it goes under the radar. People don't consider Fenway a big, upside offensive park. But if you look at the numbers, there's usually a lot of runs scored there. Even though it might be tough for some batters to hit home runs, especially the righties with that big, green monster that they have out there. There's a lot of doubles, a lot of extra base hits, a lot of guys hitting shots off the monster. So I think that we're going to see some scoring in that game today. Probably on both sides, and I think that you can look at some of the Red Sox bats, especially for cash games. Another guy who you can consider, they have Travis Shaw, the first base option, the first base eligible player. He had another home run yesterday. He's been really, really hot since he's been called up. This guy is not a big prospect. You look at information on him, and it's not like, they're saying this guy's, knocking on the door for the major leagues, just waiting for Poppy to retire. But again, as long as he's hot and he's been putting up double-digit points on DraftKings just about every game, I think he has 4 games in a row with, 13 or more DraftKings points. He's somebody you got to look at if he's in the lineup because he's swinging a hot stick right now. Next guy we can talk about, John Lamb, left-handed pitcher from Cincinnati. Right-handed bats have done better against him in his limited time in the major leagues, and that's a good trend because if you look at his minor league numbers, they've basically been the way to go after him as well. It's a tough matchup for him today. The game is at Cincy, which is a pretty good hitter's park. He's got a guy like Paul Goldschmidt to deal with who has a 482 WOBA and a 292 ISO number against left-handed pitching. So those are some big-time numbers, and Goldie obviously is always expensive on whatever site you're playing on, but this is a good matchup for him today and might be a good spot to roll him out. His teammate, Wellington Castillo, 427 WOBA, 366 ISO number. So for the catching position, he's somebody who has a lot of upside, gives you a lot of power, and is in a pretty good matchup here against a guy like Lamb. The last guy to talk about is AJ Pollock. Pollock usually hits in front of those two guys, 372 WOBA, 175 ISO. Doesn't have huge upside, but he is a guy who can rack up a couple hits. And with those big bats hitting behind him, there's a good chance for him to score some runs as well. So he's another guy you can consider. I think all 3 of those guys are in a good spot today. If you play on a site like FanDuel where you can only stack up 4 guys from a team, I would have no problem stacking up those 3 Arizona bats and maybe picking one more guy to throw in there. Maybe like a Yasmani Tomas or, an Ender Inciarte if he's on top of that order. And I think you have a nice little stack of Arizona bats that you can put in there. That'll give you some good upside today against a guy like Lamb. Let's see. We got Nick Tropiano pitching for the Los Angeles Angels. Left-handed bats have been the way to go after him in limited innings so far over the course of the last 2 years. He hasn't pitched a lot of innings in the majors, but the left-handers are the way to go get him. So on that Chicago White Sox team, I think really Adam Eaton is the guy who stands out most. 357 WOBA, 175 ISO. It's going to be leading off on top of that order. He is on the away team, so he's going to get the maximum number of bats on top of that order. And I think he might be a good cheap option for you to throw in there in the outfield. The only other guy I would look at, even though it's righty on righty, is Jose Abreu, 389 WOBA, 234 ISO number, and righty on righty matchups this year. So he's another guy that you can consider. Let's see. We got Miguel Gonzalez pitching for Baltimore today at Baltimore. Basically, guys from both sides of the plate have hit about 260 against them. Left-handed bats are at 269 with 12 homers in 61 innings, and right-handed bats are at 256 with 10 home runs in 56 innings. They play the Minnesota Twins today. So the guy who stands out to most to me is Miguel Sano. Miguel Sano has been absolutely smashing right-handed pitching this year. In the minor leagues, he actually, smashed right and left-handed pitching. But so far in the majors, he's been almost an automatic start in righty-on-righty matchups, especially when you put him up against a guy who has a high home run rate already. Sano has a 4.54 WOBA with a 333 ISO number. So you really can't argue. He stands out on the numbers. He stands out and passes the eye test. And again, he's been giving you a discount. If you look at his price on most sites, some sites his price has gotten jacked up, but on most sites he's a 15 to 30% discount from some of the top options. Guys like Arenado and Donaldson and Frazier, the most expensive guys at the position. If you can get Sano for 20 to 25% off from some of those guys, I think he has as much power, if not more, and makes for a great tournament play. Another guy you can look at, you got Brian Dozier. 340 WOBA, 247 ISO number. So he has some of the most power you're going to find at the second base position, which always makes him an option and a guy that you got to put in play. Again, I like him a little bit better against left-handers, but even in righty-on-righty matchups, the power that he has at second base is pretty undeniable. So he's somebody that you got to consider. Next game, we have Wade Miley for Boston. He's let right-handed bats hit 273 against him this year with a 1.51 whip. So he's really struggled to get out those right-handers. He goes up against Kansas City today, who's a very low strikeout team, which doesn't bode well for him. But there's a couple guys that I think you can look at on Kansas City. Lorenzo Cain is the big option, 438 WOBA, 241 ISO against left-handed pitching. He's the guy who they use in a 3-hole to really smash left-handed pitching. And I think he's going to be an option today. Again, his price is always jacked up whenever they play a left-hander, with the sites using the splits matchup and splits data so far this year to do their pricing. So you're not going to get him cheap anywhere, but he always goes under-owned, and he has been producing. So I think Cain is another guy you can look at. The only other guy I would look at is the guy who they have in the 2-hole right now, and that's the recently acquired Ben Zobrist. Zobrist is usually better against right-handed pitching, batting from the left side. He is a switch hitter, but the guy's been so hot right now, I still think you got to consider him as an option in play. I think he had 4 hits yesterday. It might have been like 4 for 4 or 4 for 5. And again, if you got a guy who's seeing the ball and hitting the ball that well, getting on base, he's scoring runs, he's driving in some runs. He had a home run the other day. So Zobrist can do a little bit of everything. The thing I like most about him is he's second base eligible. It's a tough position to fill, a position where you usually can't find a lot of upside. So if you can get a guy like Zobrist who does have some upside, I think he's going to be a positive option in your lineup today. Let's see, Jake Peavy pitching against Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh. Peavy has allowed right-handed bats to hit 286 against him this year with a 1.30 whip. His numbers aren't that horrible, but he has been getting knocked around a little bit by right-handed bats. So I think you got to look at a guy like Andrew McCutchen. 386 WOBA, 223 ISO number. Again, he's starting to heat up. He's one of the best players in baseball when he's hot. He hasn't had the greatest season so far this year, but his numbers are still pretty good, which is surprising because, like I said, he hasn't really jumped off the page as being a guy who's been absolutely a stud. But when you look at his numbers at the end of the day, you're like, you know what? He's still in that elite category. I don't know if I like paying up top dollar for him. So if you're playing on a site where he is top dollar, probably not the best option that you can put in there. But if you can get him at a reasonable price wherever you're playing, I think he's a guy that's worth paying up for. The only other guy to look at is Young-Ho Jang. Again, I'm not really sure how to pronounce this guy's name. I've heard it about 100 different ways, but the shortstop, it's spelled Kang for Pittsburgh. He's got a 355 WOBA, 154 ISO number. Again, he's been hitting in the cleanup spot or in the 5-hole for that team. Has a little bit of power, can drive in some runs, can get a couple hits for you. And he's somebody else that you can look at if you're looking for a cheap option at shortstop. Let's see. On the other side of that game, we got Charlie Morton pitching against that San Francisco team. Left-handed bats have really done the most damage against him this year. 292 WOBA, 5 home runs and 39 innings pitched. Brandon Belt is the one guy who stands out the most. 370 WOBA, 219 ISO score. But I also like some of the right-handed bats who do well in righty-on-righty matchups. Guys like Posey, guys like Pence, guys like Duffy. I think they're all in play. The only problem is it's not a very good hitter's park, so I wouldn't be looking to stack them up or excuse me, or use too many of these Giants bats. But I do think that there's a couple of them that you can put into your lineup today. Let's see. Next guy we got is Ivan Nova for the Yankees. Left-handed bats have really been, hitting him well. 281 average this year, 1.46 whip. So I think you can look at the left-handed bats in that Cleveland team. Jason Kipnis is back in the fold earlier in the week. So he's got a 422 WOBA, 168 ISO score against right-handed pitching. So Kipnis is somebody who's an option at second base. Again, doesn't have a ton of power, especially since you got to pay up for him, which is not something I like in a guy I got to pay up for. But he can rack up the hits. He can get some RBIs. He does have a little bit of power. He can hit some doubles. Hasn't really been hitting the home runs this year, but he has a few. Can also steal a base here and there, score a couple runs. So he's definitely an option to consider. The guy I like most is Michael Brantley, 383 WOBA, 169 ISO. Brantley does have power. Playing in Yankee Stadium, all those left-handers that can drive the ball right down the line are guys that you have to consider, especially against a guy like Nova who's been struggling with left-handed bats. If you need a cheap option, a dirt cheap option, someone who basically has been on fire recently is Abraham Almonte, 494 WOBA, 429 ISO number. Now, again, he's only got about like 30, 35 at bats, so it's a small sample size, but he's somebody who's been hitting it very well. Cleanup hitter, likes hitting from the left side in Yankee Stadium where he's got that short porch over there in right field. Definitely think he's somebody that you got to consider as a dirt cheap option. He's the guy that can help you fit some of the bigger bats into your lineup today that you really want to. And again, he's been batting like 5th or 6th in that Indians order, and he's been producing. So as long as this guy's been producing and batting in that spot in the order, I think he's, a decent guy to pay up for. Again, he's $2,000 over on DraftKings, so, he's one of the better salary saving options you're going to find today. He's one of the ways that you can unlock, some of the high-priced pitching that you might want to use, or some of the big bats like a guy like, Paul Goldschmidt, who we talked about earlier. Next guy we talk about, Jose Quintana, going up against the Los Angeles Angels. Quintana has been lights out to left-handed batters. Right-handed batters have knocked him around a little bit, though. Right-handers have a 296 batting average against him, only 10 home runs in 119 innings pitched. Sounds like a lot of home runs, but when you consider that it's about 120 innings, it's about 1 home run every 12 innings, which is a great average. Let's see, he's got a 1.37 whip, though, to right-handed batters, so he has been letting a couple right-handers get on base and get some hits against him. The only guy that really stands out in that Angels team to me is Mike Trout. 408 WOBA, 286 ISO, obviously one of the best players in all of baseball. He is the one option who I think is a great option today. You can look at some of the guys like a Pujols, maybe even like a catching option like a Carlos Sanchez if you're looking for a cheap guy there. But other than that, I'm not really looking to target too many guys against Quintana. He's had probably one of his better years in the majors so far this year, and there's really no reason to, think that today's going to be the day where that all falls apart on him. Let's see, we got Colin McHugh. McHugh is a reverse splits guy. Right-handed bats are hitting 300 against him, 10 home runs in 78 innings, and he is a right-handed pitcher. The problem I have with Tampa Bay is they don't have anybody on that team really who hits well against right-handed pitching. Kurt Casale is literally the only guy who stands out on the numbers. 392 WOBA for him. I think he's got about a 400 ISO right now, which is huge. But again, I'd be looking more for regression on that because that's not a number that we normally see out of him. He has gotten into a couple good pitches lately and hitting a couple home runs. And again, he has limited plate appearances, which is why the numbers are that high. But he is definitely not a stud who I think you have to have in your lineups. Next guy we talk about, Patrick Corbin, left-handed pitcher. He's been really good. He has been lights out to left-handed batters. So I wouldn't look at any of the left-handed batters that are on this Cincinnati team. Guys like Billy Hamilton, guys like Joey Votto, they're just not in play for me today against Corbin. Right-handed bats has been the way to go after him, and even that hasn't been very fruitful. 248 batting average, 5 home runs in 33 innings pitched. Like I said, he's been good, and lately he's been very good. He had 30-plus DraftKings points in his last start, had another start with 24 DraftKings points, 2 or 3 back. Did throw a clunker in there in the middle, so he is up and down. He is a young pitcher, so that's something that you're going to expect. But I think this is a pretty decent matchup for him today, and I actually think I would rather use him than target bats against him. If I was going to target some bats against him, there's really 2 guys that I'd look at. Todd Frazier has a 403 WOBA with a 409 ISO score, and Eugenio Suarez has a 392 WOBA with a 267 ISO score. Now, Suarez has been batting in the 2-hole, Bottle's been in the 3-hole, and Frazier's been in the 4. So those guys towards the top of the lineup, I think, are guys that are in play. If you're looking for another right-handed bat at second base, there's a lot of second base options today. So I'm not doing this anywhere, but, I could see a little bit of merit in using a Brandon Phillips. But like I said, there's other guys who I like a lot more at second base. So I don't think he would be somebody who I put in play. Other than that, you got Max Scherzer going up against Colorado. Now, I don't think Scherzer is going to have a huge upside game today. I think that Colorado has a lot of left-handed bats and a lot of guys who hit well against right-handed pitching, including Arenado, who has like 22 or 23 of his home runs against right-handers this year. So it's a tougher matchup, but Scherzer is a stud. The problem I have is he's very expensive on all these sites, and he hasn't been pitching like a super stud lately. If you want to use him in a cash game, I think he's been giving you a decent, solid return. But if you're looking for the upside for a tournament, he hasn't been giving you the tournament upside that you would really look for. So while I don't know, I'm going to defer to Josh on whether or not he thinks it's okay to start a guy like Scherzer in Colorado today. I will say that using the Colorado bats today against a guy like Scherzer, is probably not the best upside play. It's contrarian if you want to use it for a tournament. It is Coors Field. Like I said, some of these left-handed bats hit right-handed pitching very well. Guys like Blackman, guys like Cargo. But again, I'm not paying up top dollar for guys going up against a pitcher of the caliber of Max Scherzer. You got Jake Arrieta going up against Atlanta. Arrieta, I think, is in a good spot today, and the Atlanta bats are not. They're not a high strikeout team, Atlanta, which might hurt Arrieta a little bit, but I also don't think they're a very good hitting team. They're like middle of the pack. And again, that's when they're healthy. And right now they're not really healthy. They're struggling a little bit. I'm not a big fan of this Atlanta team, so there's really nobody who stands out for me on the numbers. Like I said, AJ Pierzynski probably has the best WOBA ISO combo, and AJ Pierzynski is not a guy that I want to roll into my lineups all that often. Last guy is Chris Archer going up against Houston. Now, Archer's been struggling a little bit lately, but Houston is a very high strikeout team, and Archer is a strikeout pitcher. Again, maybe I use Archer, maybe I don't today. I'm going to defer to Josh and kind of look into the numbers a little deeper. But what I do know is he's good enough that I don't think I want to stack up a whole bunch of these Houston bats against them. Guy like Carlos Correa has been on fire, had the walk-off home run last night, has become like the top shortstop option. So if you wanted to roll him out there, I don't think it's a great matchup for him, but I also don't think there's a lot of shortstops that have his kind of upside. So I'm not going to argue with you. I do think he's expensive, though. He's tough to fit in. He's tough to build rosters around. So he might not be somebody that I'm using today. But, again, the way he's played, I really can't argue with anybody who does decide to put him in their lineup. The only other guy that really gives me a little bit of concern is Preston Tucker. And, again, he's cooled off a little bit as well, but he does have a good WOBA and ISO score against right-handed pitching. Probably one of the best bats they have against right-handers, and he'll be hitting in that two-hole in front of Correa. So if you're going to use anybody on this team, those are the two guys that I would look at. And that pretty much sums it up for today's edition of Benny's Bats. Like I said, there's an 11-game slate going on tonight. It is a Thursday, so it's a big slate for a Thursday, but, not a huge slate overall. There's a game in Coors Field. You definitely got to be mindful of that. Make sure you take a look at the weather and see if the wind's blowing out in Wrigley. We saw what happened yesterday with the wind blowing out in Wrigley, so I think you can always expect runs to be scored when that's the opportunity and that's the case. And that pretty much wraps it up. So thank you for joining us here at rotocurve.com. You can follow us on Twitter at RotoCurve. You can follow me at BennyR11. And as always, stay classy, DFS.